like to call the Finance Committee to order.
I'd like to call the Board of Selectmen to order.
You know, okay. If you do later, just, we'll look out. Well, welcome everybody to the end of summer. I'm sure everybody's really sad like I was, to like not be able to sit on my patio and look at the full moon to the end of summer crickets. So we'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. But welcome to the first financial forum of 2014. This is kind of a special meeting with the school committee and the Board of Selectmen and FinCom, really to discuss progress around the Woburn Street School project. I know kind of just a quick overview of the schedule. That I know the school committee's hired a consultant and they're putting some numbers together. But the idea being that if we, going forward, there'd be a special town meeting in September, I believe, and then if it passes town meeting, we would have a debt exclusion vote on the project. I think November, late October, maybe early, well, late October can't be early November. So we, at our last meeting at the Finance Committee, we had prepared a number of questions, sort of more on the operating side of if we did have a new project like this, what would it look like? Not so much for the project costs, but really sort of the day-to-day, operating costs of the new school. And I know the school committee, the schools hired a project consultant, and I'm not, and I know you were kind of putting together some number. I don't know if you're, prepared to have some discussion on some of the hard costs.
Prepared to give you a lot of information.
Okay, so and that being said, so that's really the gist of the meeting. So I'd really like to turn it over to John and the schools for a presentation. But just one other thing really quick. Since we're all here, and it's really hard, especially at the end of the summer, to get all the boards together, if this really was the only agenda item, if there is something that we should be talking about after this, maybe since we have everybody here, if there's any other things, we should just throw it out there.
If I could just ask everyone to sign in, there's a yellow page sign-in sheet somewhere. If you haven't signed in, if you please would.
Great, and welcome everybody. I neglected to usually these financial forums are when we have the different boards, but they are public meetings. I see a lot of folks who are not on those things, so welcome, to this. And so I'd like to turn it over to John.
Thank you, Kurt.
Oh, sorry, yes. One thing, sorry, John. I know David Greenfield, a member of the Finance Committee, would like to make a personal statement.
Yeah, in the interest of full disclosure, I won't be participating in any FinCom vote, as I am I'm an abutter to the church, Precinct 5 rep, and so I'll be participating in discussion as everyone would, but I won't be participating in the vote.
Thanks. Okay. John?
Great. I want to thank everyone for giving us the opportunity to give you an update. We have a lot of new information that we want to share with you this evening. I think some of it may come as a little bit of a surprise and a change to some of the things that we've been talking about. As you know, we have spent a significant amount of time since April going through the feasibility study, talking to abutters, talking to the community, talking to town officials about the Woburn Street project. And I'm going to show you a lot of information this evening, and really the summary of that information that I'm going to say up front, because it's not like a movie and that there has to be an ending to the movie, is that we will be recommending that we do not move forward with the Woburn Street project. And I'm going to explain to you why tonight with all of the information that we have come up with during the time that we have been researching this project and where we need to go with the project. Okay? But first I want to get you up to a point of give you a story of why we're here and where this story began was in January of 2011. When we actually started having discussions that we had some space issues at our elementary level, and that there was an increasing percentage of families that wanted full-day kindergarten. So that prompted in the November town meeting of 2011 to have an elementary space study approved, which we then had done by Locker Associates, and that was completed and reported out to the Finance Committee, the School Committee, and the Board of Selectmen in June of 2012. From that point, the School Committee and Central Office Administration, Mary and I, did an awful lot of research as to what options were available to looking at the different types of space that we would need to have full-day kindergarten, public full-day kindergarten for all students in our district. And so in October of 2012, the school committee took a vote and supported the implementation of publicly funded full-day kindergarten for all students, assuming that we were able to get the space needs addressed. So throughout, from October to April, we pursued those space options and had a lot of conversations with St. Agnes, and as you know, a letter of intent was reached in April of 2013 with St. Agnes, which then started the ball rolling in the discussion to have a feasibility study done by AI3, and a project manager was hired prior to that, KVA Associates, who oversaw the feasibility study that AI3 was doing. We have been in contact with the community. We've had several meetings with the community, with the abutters, with parents, with town officials since May of 2013. And we received last week all of the information from AI3 as terms of the estimates, the cost estimates to run the project. So we're gonna go through all that this evening. Before that though, I want to emphasize why we're here, and that's to emphasize that we really feel that full-day kindergarten for all students is something that we need to pursue. The research is very clear on full-day kindergarten, and we've discussed this before, that it definitely has a positive academic and social and behavioral benefit for all students. And the research is extremely clear on that. It reduces retention rates, it reduces remediation rates, it actually reduces the percentage of students that require special education services. Students show faster gains in literacy and language and mathematical concepts when they have full-day kindergarten. So the research is very clear, and that is why the schools committee supported moving towards full-day kindergarten. I'm going to skip the rest of the research and then move to the facts about states that implement full-day kindergarten. Right now, there are 10 states that require districts to provide publicly funded full-day kindergarten. Massachusetts has decided to do it a little bit differently. And what they've done is they've allowed both districts to charge tuition, but they've also given an incentive that if you move forward with publicly funded full-day kindergarten, they will reimburse you through the Chapter 70 funding for those students, for all of the students that are attending full-day kindergarten that are not paying tuition. So in Massachusetts right now, there are 242 communities out of the 351 that offer publicly funded full-day kindergarten to all students. There are 73 districts that charge tuition. Reading is one of them, and our tuition is the third highest in the state. This is a map that shows, and I'll try to show you, explain a little bit. Everything that's in the light, the tan color, these are all the communities that offer publicly funded, tuition-free full-day kindergarten. That's 242 communities. The next shade of brown is, there are 8 communities, and they offer full-day kindergarten, but it's tuition-based, and it's $995 to $2,500 is the range that they charge. The next darker color, they offer tuition of between $2,600 and $3,600, and there are 60 communities in that category. The next color, which Reading is a part of, offers tuition between $3,700 and $4,900. There are 21 communities in that category. And then there are a few that are in purple, scattered, in which there are 20 communities that do not offer full-day kindergarten at all, and they just offer a half-day program. So you can see that in Massachusetts, there's a very large percentage of the communities currently offer tuition-free full-day kindergarten.
What do you look?
Do you want me to take questions now? Or do
You know what, let's do it a little bit, but I'd really like to kind of get through the presentation. I know we have prepared a number of questions at the end, but let's.
So as I mentioned earlier, why the pursuit now for full-day kindergarten? Well, first of all, in the best interest of students, but also that, as I mentioned earlier, that there is an incentive by the state to, rather than mandate it, which some states do, to do it through the Chapter 70 process, where you would receive additional Chapter 70 funding for those students that are full-day tuition free. This is a chart that I believe is one of the questions that was asked in terms of what is the historical amount of Chapter 70 funding that the town of Reading has received. And you can see over the last 20 years that the Chapter 70 funding has been on a steady increase, and then only in 2004-05 was there a 0% increase in Chapter 70 funding. So you can see over the last 20 years we have seen a steady increase in our Chapter 70 funding. If we went to full-day kindergarten, certainly that would increase even more based on the number of kindergarten students that would be tuition-free full-day kindergarten. I'm going to turn this slide over to Mary, who's going to talk a little bit about how much would it cost for publicly funded full-day kindergarten.
I know there was a lot of questions about what the specific operational cost related to Woburn Street School is, but in light of what John mentioned earlier, we haven't really spent a whole lot of time. But we did want to include the cost of what it would take to go from the model we currently employ to publicly funded or universal full-day kindergarten for all students. What you see here is, this is 2012-13, this was last school year. You can see that we had 12.5 teachers for our kindergarten program, 9 of which were full-day students, full-day programs, and 3.5 were half-day programs. And they were supported by 5.9 paraeducators. And the paraeducators work different hours depending on whether they're in a half-day program or a full-day program. They're not working there the whole day. They're generally working between 12.5 and 17.5 hours in those kindergarten classrooms. For next year, you'll see for staffing purposes, we are going to be at 13.6 FTEs for teachers and 7.6 FTEs for paras. We have 7 full days for this school year that's about to start, 2.6 half days, and we also have 4 integrated programs where full-day children and half-day children are actually in the same classroom together, and the half-day children are dismissed basically halfway through the day, just prior to lunchtime. So this is a new model for us, and it was a model that we employed because 2 of our schools, Birch Meadow and Wood End, had high demand for full-day kindergarten, but did not have the additional space to do so. So we have taken a lesson actually from North Andover, who has this model, and we've employed it here in Reading. If we were to implement full-day K in 2014-15, which we know at this point is not a likely scenario, obviously in light of the news you've heard, but just for analysis purposes, if we were to go to full-day kindergarten, we would need to increase our full-day staff by 3.4 FTE teachers, so 17 teachers, and we would also need to add almost a full 0.9 FTE paraeducators. These teachers would be full-time teachers, full-day kindergarten, and each kindergarten would be supported by a paraeducator that would be working in the classroom about 28 hours per week in the whole day. And you can see what the impact on staffing is. So we go from 1.2 million in 2014, and we increase by about $250,000 in operational impact for the year that we implement for just staffing costs. There would also be an incremental cost for materials, not a huge increase because there's classroom materials that could be spread. Obviously, in half-day, we spread amongst all those classrooms, but there would be some extra classroom sets of materials that need to be purchased. One thing that I would draw attention to is the offset picture, the tuition offset. As you know, we currently collect tuition, as the superintendent mentioned, $4,200. We currently have a balance in that full-day tuition account. That balance was created over time by collecting more than what was anticipated that we would get in receipts. And we're at a point right now where we generally have enough in the full-day kindergarten account to be able to fund the offset that we carry in the next year's budget. So therefore, we've sort of pre-funded that offset in the budget. If we were to move to full-day kindergarten in this 2014-15 school year, we obviously would no longer be collecting tuition, But we would anticipate that we would likely still have a balance, and we would use that entire balance up to try and bridge the gap between this year of increase in operational expenses and the subsequent year when we would see that bump up in the Chapter 70 funding that we would get from the state as a result of having all these additional full-day kindergarten kids count towards Chapter 70 funding. So that you can see in the net what we're looking at is that in the first year of implementation, there would be about a $500,000 increase to the operating budget. That would be the impact from full-day kindergarten. But in the subsequent year, when the Chapter 70 money comes in, that increase comes in, there actually would be enough offsetting revenue that from a year-over-year impact, from a year-over-year cost impact, you would see that that impact would actually decrease. Because instead of having a net general fund impact of 1.1, almost 1.2 million, you would have a net general fund expense of 567,000. Assuming, and this is a big assumption, but assuming that you're applying the entire increase in Chapter 70 that's attributable to full-day kindergarten to that general fund expense. That's all.
Just in full disclosure, the next slide that's in your packet, we actually took out of the presentation because it does have some errors in it because it included the cost for Woburn Street, which now no longer are valid. So we're not going to be showing that slide at this point.
Can we get this in context a little bit? I'm listening to an argument or a discussion of a budget which is, am I hearing not applicable, or is it applicable in some way?
This that you see here is what it would cost to operate full-day kindergarten in our district from a personnel and materials staffing standpoint.
So
It does not include the operational costs for a building.
No, my point is, does it remain a budget that you're moving towards implementing?
No.
Okay.
No, one of the questions that was asked is,
one
one of the questions that was asked was, what would it cost to implement full-day kindergarten?
Yeah, but I think the
I'm trying to
context.
figure out why
I
I'm
think-
listening to this and to put it into context, what I'm listening for.
Yeah, the context, I guess, of the question was is that when we had asked that question, it was, what would be the cost of running an all-day kindergarten, full-day kindergarten program with a new school? So I think all of us might have this question, is that since it's not going to, this project is not going to go forward, and you just mentioned that you're not going to go forward with all-day kindergarten next year, then what, so we're not really talking about implementing this program in this budget cycle?
That is correct.
Okay. So,
But it's information for you because down the road, this is good
Right.
information for you to know.
But the thing, but I think the thing was that we were talking about in our previous meetings was not really implementing a full-day kindergarten until we had sort of figuring out where we're going to put it. So we don't know where we're now going to put it, so it seems like this discussion is really not all that relevant.
Yeah, and I think that's why I want to continue the presentation, and maybe all of this will get answered.
Okay, all that, okay.
You need to know.
Okay.
That was one of the questions that was asked, and we felt that we should answer.
Right.
That- So I want to go back and review very quickly the options that we have had and discussed and researched over the last several months. And the one option that we felt was the most feasible for the community was the Woburn Street option, because it did provide us with the space necessary to offer the full-day kindergarten for all students. And even though 2 of the schools were going to be assigned to Woburn Street, it allowed us to free up space at Wood End, at Barrows, at Eaton, at the high school, at Rise. So it was a multi-level solution to the space crunch that we had. We also anticipated at the time it would be the least costly of all the options because we were taking an existing building and renovating it instead of building a brand new facility somewhere else. It also would have allowed us to implement full-day kindergarten the most quickly out of any of the options. So that is why we, at the time, pursued Woburn Street, because we felt that that was the best option out of all of the options that we were looking at. Over the time since April, when we have been researching this, and we've had the services of the architect and the owner's project manager, we have received a lot of input, a lot of feedback. on the Woburn Street site. So we've had community meetings at Barrows, we've had 2 at Parker, inviting abutters and any interested parties. We've certainly talked about it at the school committee. We had a booth at Town Day where we had lots of conversations with community members about the project. We've also had small group meetings with staff and parents, and we also have had a few meetings with town officials. And the architect has met with town officials as well to talk about traffic, to talk about parking, to talk about fire and safety concerns. So there's been a lot of input and feedback from a lot of different groups on this site. The challenges that we have discovered and have heard loud and clear from the community and from town officials is the parking and the traffic drop-off and pick-up times. What was starting to happen as we kept trying to come up with solutions for these problems is that it seems like we kept coming up with more problems. One of the challenges with the Woburn Street site is that, unlike all of our other elementary school and middle school and high school sites, is that there's only one way in and one way out. There is not other roads that lead to that school. Even Wood End, which is one way in, one way out, does have Roma Lane, which has a gate to it if we need that access. But Woburn Street was a concern. The chief, both chiefs, brought this up in the conversations that we had, is that they were very uncomfortable with possible pedestrian issues with that, with traffic, that with the pickup piece and the drop-off, and the queuing system that the parking consultant came up with, what it was actually doing was discouraging people from getting into the line. And that if they had to wait more than 5 minutes, then that they would be parking on a lot of the side streets, which is what we were hearing from the abutters was going to be a major issue. So we took that feedback very seriously when we were researching all of this. We also discovered, and I'm going to show you a slide in a minute, that the cost estimates were significantly higher than originally anticipated. When we were originally looking at this site, we felt that our early research was telling us that the construction cost would be somewhere between $7 and $11 million. And although that was true, there was a lot of other costs that made it a lot more complicated. I'm going to show you that slide in a second. The other concern that we heard was actually from parents at Barrows and Eaton, that from those 2 school districts, that they were the only 2 school districts that were attending the Woburn Street site. And they felt that they were being impacted more than the other 3 elementary schools. So those were the challenges that we kept hearing loud and clear throughout this entire process and the feedback that we were receiving. So here is an estimated total project budget of the Woburn Street site. We received these numbers last week from the architect. You can see that the actual building construction and site cost was estimated at $11 million. And what was happening is, even though it's a building and it's constructed solidly, a lot of changes would have had to have been made inside the building, which raised the construction costs. For example, we would have had to add a 3rd floor to get the 14 classrooms necessary in that building, which is what we really needed. There was a contingency built in of 7%, and that's the number you see there. The architectural services and project management, you can see that was another $1.5 million. Other costs related to the FF&E piece, which includes technology and other services, was close to $500,000. And then certainly the purchase of the property, which we all knew ahead of time was $1.4 million. This total came to $15.1 million and does not include the Parker Middle School parking lot that we were proposing that we build as part of this solution, that would become staff parking so that we would free up more parking space at the Woburn Street site, and the natural gas line installation that would have to come from, I believe, West Street or Summer. So after meeting with the architects and listening to the feedback that we've been hearing over the last several months, that is the reason why we feel that we cannot recommend moving forward with this project, the Woburn Street project. So now what do we do? We're at a point now where, you know, we have to look at other options again. And so at the time when we were looking at other options, we here are the options that we looked at, and you've heard these before. One was adding modular classrooms to each elementary school. Another was building additions to each elementary school, leasing space, or constructing a new early childhood center. We're not going to say tonight which one we recommend, because we feel that we need to take a step back, hit the reset button, and take a good hard look at this all over again to see what is the best option. We truly believe, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, that full-day kindergarten is something that we need to pursue for our children in our district. But right now, we're not prepared to move forward with another option, and I feel we need to go through a process, involve the community in that process, and take a look at what we feel is the best option. So very quickly, and you've seen some of these before, the modular classroom option was probably the least expensive option, the quickest to implement, but the sites themselves, as you know, our elementary schools do not have large footprints, and the sites themselves, not all of them are suitable for modular installation. If you connect the modular classrooms to the actual school, some of our schools you would need to actually add a full fire sprinkler protection system, which would add more to the cost. At the time that we did the parent and community survey about 1.5 years ago, there was a strong feeling that modular classrooms was not a viable option. And we have in the past, as you know, with Birch Meadow and Barrows before it was renovated, and Killam, we have had modular classrooms on those sites many years ago before we added the 5th elementary school. And I know that there was at that time, a lot of community outcry to remove the modular classrooms. It also would not address the other space challenges that we discussed earlier that Woburn Street would have solved, which would have included the high school and the preschool spaces. Rise would stay at the high school and at Wood End, so those spaces would not be freed up, with this option. Another option was additions to each elementary school, and you have similar challenges with this as you do the modular, only actually they're a little bit more complicated because we had KBA take a look at which of the elementary schools would actually be buildable for a permanent addition, and really only 2 of the 5 elementary schools were rated as good candidates for expansion for a permanent building addition, and Wood End was rated fair, and the other 2, Killam and Barrows, were rated poor. So it would be difficult to add on to each of the 5 sites. Your total construction costs for this would exceed $12 million, and that's just construction costs. It does not include any of the other costs that you saw on the other chart that I showed you earlier about Woburn Street, and that is also based on 2012 estimates, because that was the number, that was part of the Locker report in their estimates. The construction piece itself would be extremely disruptive. You would have multiple building projects going on at the same time in the district. There would be the challenge of where do you put students when construction is going on. You could not do this during summer months. So there's a lot of challenges involved in that. It would have to be a multi-year construction problem. And then there'd be a lot of logistical issues involved with that. Renting space is another one that we looked at, and this is something, actually the first option we looked at last summer, and while it's the quickest to implement, there are not a lot of rentable spaces in Reading where you could create educational classroom space. There is also a significant recurring operational cost to renting space. And then finally, the last option is constructing a new early childhood center. Certainly that would offer the greatest flexibility in design and future use. You could use it also as a community center. You could look at it as creating additional recreational space. It would be for the entire district and not just 2 schools and a preschool, which is what Woburn Street was. The cons, it's definitely the most expensive option. It's estimated it would cost somewhere between $21 million and $25 million based on current construction costs. Where would you build it is another challenge. The lack of suitable land in Reading. And this design and construction phase would take about 2 to 4 years, which would then delay the implementation of the full-day kindergarten. So those are the different options that we still now will have to re-examine. So here's what we know, and just kind of summarize. It appears that we have strong support for publicly funded full-day kindergarten in our community. We think we've heard that very loud and clear. We have also heard from parents that they would appear to prefer that all children have the same kindergarten experience, and that we also know that renovating and constructing a new facility is going to have some additional operational costs. And I think this is going to address another one of your questions. So in terms of if we were to have another building, say if it was a Woburn Street or another building, there would be some additional staffing needs, and that would certainly include a custodian, a school nurse, clerical support staff, and then some incremental increases to reading, OT, PT, speech services. Because we would be moving, if RISE were to move into this new building, which that would be part of the plan, a lot of your RISE staff, including the director, would go to this site. So you would not have a need for a new principal, additional principal position. There is an existing position that exists in the district. Certainly you would have utility repair and maintenance costs that would for the additional building. And depending on if there was a new building built, you would have to have additional transportation costs depending on where it was built. So if it was built on one side of town, we would have to use the 2-mile rule. So anything outside of 2 miles, any students outside of 2 miles would have to be bused. So where do we go from here? And I did allude to that we're going to form a working group that's going to take a look at the different options that will then report back to the school committee for expanding early childhood education. We'll determine what's feasible and what's not feasible, and then go from there. That's really where we're at right now. And we felt that it was important to share all of this information with you prior to a town meeting and prior to an election. We didn't feel that this was not, we've been listening to a lot of feedback. We received the estimate costs, and that really is why we came to the conclusion that we've come to. Oh, one more thing is, what if we do nothing? And I think that's a question that's always asked too. If we do nothing, we cannot offer publicly funded full-day kindergarten for all students. And I think Mary talked about this in a previous presentation. We probably could get to about 75% capacity of our students, of our families accessing full-day kindergarten, if with tuition-based. That at that point we would have maxed out all of our space options. What is also going to happen, and this was part of what was happening too, and I'll show you this on the next slide, is that there are other programmatic demands for our space. So for example, over the last few years, since 2005, or 2006, 2007, when Wood End was built, we have seen a decrease in our classrooms at the elementary level because we've added special education program, as well as an increase in the number of families that have requested full-day kindergarten, and we've increased our RISE program to 7 classrooms. So it's not just the full-day kindergarten piece. There are other things that are taking space away. I do also want to emphasize again, this is not an enrollment issue. Our enrollment is staying pretty consistent. It's increasing at about 1% or so or less a year. So it is not an enrollment issue. This is a programmatic change and programmatic issue that's causing the decrease in space. If we continue to do nothing, there is an option that I have been using and will be using more and more, which is called the superintendent's option, which the school committee has given me latitude that students that move into Reading new or are new to kindergarten, that do not have siblings in a school already, that we can move them to outside of their school district to balance class sizes. And so far, I've had to use that about 30 to 40% of the time when we have families moving in or when we have a new cohort of kindergarten students moving in, so that we can keep the class sizes balanced and maximize as much space as possible. If we Again, if we do nothing, it will have a ripple effect on other classrooms and class sizes. So for example, if I have a school that has no additional classrooms and the class sizes start to creep up to 25, 26, 27, and I don't have an additional classroom space, I can't add a teacher to that school and add a classroom because I don't have another space. So that is a distinct possibility that could happen as well. So those are the types of things that could happen if we do nothing. And here's a chart that just shows, and you've seen this chart before, that shows where we were in 2005 with classrooms that were allocated for these different programs, classrooms that were allocated in 2012, and what it's going to be in 2013. So you can see that full-day kindergarten has gone from 5 classrooms in 2005, where it was 1 per school, to 9 last year, and now we're up to 11 because we've included, as Mary indicated, the 2 integrated classrooms that include half-day and full-day students because we no longer have the space at Birch Meadow and Wood End to be able to split the two programs. So in the future, if we were going to go to full-day K for all students, assuming that we maintain the same enrollment of kindergarten, we would need about 6 additional classrooms so that we would have 17 classrooms for full-day kindergarten. In terms of special education programs, in 2005 we had 1 special education program in the district. We're now up to 6 at the elementary level, which means that we need 6 classrooms for those programs. And certainly in the future, that's going to be based on student need. Special education programs allow us to keep our students in the district with their peers, which is the right thing to do. And then the Rise Preschool, we started in 2005 with 5 classrooms. We are now up to 7, and that will continue for next year. We have 2 at Wood End as satellite classrooms. So we have all 5 classrooms that are at the high school that are filled, and then we have 2 more at Wood End. And certainly the Rise Preschool is also based on student need. In that population, we're up to about 120 students in the Rise Preschool program for this year. Where we've seen a decrease in our classes is our art and music. And when originally we went to 5 elementary schools, one of the things that was, I don't want to say promised, but was advocated for was to have separate art and music classrooms in each of the elementary schools so that we could continue to grow and strengthen our art and music programs, which are a critical part of our curriculum. We have some fabulous middle school and high school art and music programs, and that is because of the work that's being done at our elementary levels, moving those students through and continuing their interest in that. So you can see in 2005, we had 2 per school, and now we're down to 7, and those, we would certainly need 3 classrooms to get that back up. Those classrooms are now gone to address some of these other programmatic needs that I mentioned earlier. So that's where we're at. I know I've thrown a lot at you in the last hour or so.
Well, that's, thank you for that. I'm sure you must be terribly disappointed in how hard you worked.
Yes, I will also mention we've already had conversations with St. Agnes about this, so they're not finding out about this right now.
No, and I know that a lot of work, just on your time and also volunteer time and everybody looking at this, that obviously was not the result you were expecting.
No.
And so I guess, sort of maybe back to square one. A lot of the questions that we had prepared sort of were geared toward, what are the costs about the specific project, which now we know is not going to happen, which I guess obviates now the need for a special town meeting and a special election. So, that'll come off the table. But I guess, I'll just start off in terms of, now that you have the nowhere to hit the reset button. You mentioned sort of forming a working group, I'm assuming, to look at the options to ultimately, if I understand correctly, to implement at some point a full-day kindergarten program in the district. How do you anticipate sort of setting that up? I mean, now that you've gone to the community, you've gotten the feedback not only on that specific site, but on full-day in general, would that just be a working group of the school committee, or would you sort of envision opening that up kind of to the community so that, you have sort of a broader impact and participation?
It would definitely be a mixed group.
And what's the timeline for that, and ultimately, what do you don't,
I don't think we're really into those specifics yet, but I mean, we want to certainly start it sooner than later.
and then I guess the other question is, so that if this is not gonna happen, then we're just gonna do what we do now, which is offer a full-day tuition-based, full-day kindergarten, in the schools, and you'll obviously, I know you said it's growing, but you'll be limited by space concerns, I imagine, so there might be lotteries or something.
Potentially.
Well, I mean, that's, I'll open it up to the rest of the group, finance committee and folks there, but just, again, I just want to say I appreciate all the work that did go into this, and, we were expecting a different discussion.
Yes.
So, but yet the problem still is there, and so now we just, as we do in Reading, we'll tackle it, from another point of, view, and figure out how to do it all together. So with that, I'll open it up in general to questions. John?
John or Mary, when did the school committee vote, or when did you internally come to the conclusion that you presented tonight?
Over the last week.
And what are the,
Because we received the final information from the architect.
and what are the residual costs to the town or to the school committee by virtue of this decision? There were some escape costs built into or cost recovery clauses built into the contract. What are those?
The one cost that we had committed to was to pay for rent between July 1, so for the month of July, August, September, and October, that was equal to the amount of rent lost if the tenant vacated the property, which the tenant did do. And the amount of the rent was $5,995, so essentially $24,000. We have, though, however, St. Agnes is currently in the process of renovating their parish center, and they actually are in need of space to offer their religious education classes. So they are actually renting space from us at the Parker Middle School, thereby offsetting a good deal of that. So there will be a net expense to the community. We're having discussions about what that will look like.
Thank you.
But also, just as a follow-up to that, I know that at the last town meeting, we did vote sort of a line item that was sort of for school space issues, which I'm assuming some of the costs of doing the cost analysis came from that. Is that an appropriate fund or appropriate place to maybe fund some of that from some already existing funding that we did?
I guess I would defer to Bob, but that is a conversation I think we've had, and maybe get an opinion from town council on that. I believe we've incurred to date about $79,000 in expenses.
And someone remind me what we appropriated?
I think there was 150,000 left.
So, other questions?
Yeah, so in light of this discussion, last night, Board of Selectmen set the warrant for the special town meeting. So we have a motion that I believe the town manager has brought to undo that. So if you indulge us, unless somebody has any objection, we're gonna go ahead and do that right now.
Two more free nights would be,
I move to cancel the September special town meeting.
Second, sir. Okay, all those in favor? Yes? Or no?
Thank you, otherwise we would have had to hold the meeting anyways, and then just cancel it that night.
We just saved you all a nice amount of time.
yep.
Can I ask a question about the working group? And I know you're at the very beginning of conceptualizing it, but on that slide, underneath it, you say determine if an early childhood center is a feasible, viable option. Are you predominantly looking at that, or are you going to go back to square one and look at all of
We're
them?
going to go back to square one.
Okay. Oh, and one more question.
Sure.
The superintendent's option, could you clarify what you said about 30 to 40% of the time you're using the superintendent's option?
Yeah, so what that means is that when a family moves into Reading, and that's what's happening right now, and we're getting a lot of phone calls that students want to enroll. Instead of them going to the district that they live in, we're moving them to another district.
So when you say 30 to 40%, that's new families to Reading, not all.
Correct,
underlying
correct.
kindergartens. Okay.
30 to 40% of the phone calls we're getting, we unfortunately have to move them outside of their home school district.
Dr. Doherty, that's an option that we've been using for 5 or
4 years.
4 years?
4 years.
John?
John, one follow-up question. Under the circumstance where we go to a public full-day kindergarten, do parents at that point have the latitude to not use kindergarten? In other words, today it's based on the preference of the parent whether they enroll their child. If you go to the tuition, non-tuition based, the public based, do parents have the latitude, or is it obligatory now? Does the program become obligatory?
Can we choose half-day?
They will not be a half-day program. So they would be in a full-day program. Or they could choose to go to private kindergarten. Or not go. The law is you do not need to attend school till you're 6 years old.
They still have the prerogative to do any of the above.
Right, but not going half-day in public.
I understand, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like to thank John and Mary for listening to us. I know it's probably a big disappointment for you. As an educator, I do realize it's a huge need for full-day kindergarten. And I think our neighbors, all of us are really concerned as part of the safety of the children there, but I do want to thank you for all of your time.
You just state your name and.
I'm sorry, Ian Panini. I live on Temple Street. My second grade teacher.
Nice work.
Thank you, Mr. Meany.
That's why everybody's so well behaved.
You have to stay after the meeting and clap to your raise.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I guess I have a question. Are all the elementary schools full, like flat out? Or if we decided to offer full-day kindergarten, if you were willing to transport your kid to a different district?
They're full. We have no empty
There is
class.
absolutely not one free
We don't
class
have
from
any
anywhere. Okay,
classrooms in the
that was my question. Thank you very much.
No?
We're just going to adjourn the selectmen. There's no other conversation.
So moved.
Second.
4-0.
One more time, any other questions, concerns? Well, I guess this was a shorter meeting than everybody was anticipating. Before I adjourn the finance committee. Oh, you have to move it. Are there any, I mean, you know, we have the school committee here, we have the board, we have, you know, is there any? I guess we'll do that.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
So Bob, can you just go over kind of what the, you know, sort of what the schedule is for the next?
That's what I wanted to talk to finance.
Next financial forum, I know we had a couple of dates. Now that we don't have this town meeting and the election, does that change our schedule at all?
Finance committee had a financial forum on September 11th to further discuss it. And on October 9th to discuss that. I would honestly say September is much too soon to talk about the upcoming election. I suggest you just have a regular meeting in September and cancel. I don't know of any kind of committee-wide transportation you want to meet on this. Yeah, I am this guy here.
So I guess the part of the meeting is folks can stay in this little FinCom if they like. But otherwise, this will just be a continuation of the finance committee meeting.
I have heard.
Thank you all.
Hey, Kevin, good night. Thank you for coming again. Appreciate your support.
Blanchard and Laura. I do have a base.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I do have some problems. In fact, that should. This makes us look bad. Makes us look
And then a
bad.
financial forum.
Yeah, I heard it.
Keep that up. Get that going.
But I could almost give you a picture of this way budget now.
Can everybody see that?
Is that fair?
So, this, Bob, you gotta yell. So we're gonna do a financial, John.
So I think
Regular meeting on September 11th at Town Hall. Cancel September 16th special town meeting. Cancel possible election on October.
So basically, we're then do a financial forum for the budget on October 9th.
I have you meeting on October 16th to vote the warrant articles. The selectmen will close it on September 24th, so there's really no sense in you looking at it ahead of time, although we have 22 articles right now, probably in the, about half of them are financial, most of them are kind of small.
So that most of pretty good.
Let me try to think. There's going to be some debt authorizations. We'll be back to help. I'll give you sort of a thing. In the water fund, the current year, last year's budget was $550,000 to work on the water fund. There has been no procurement process undertaken last year because they got into a long discussion with the cell tower companies whose equipment is up on the water tower. The total cost of the project, instead of being $550,000, is closer to $900,000. And the negotiations have been how much, because some of the work is related to the cell tower, how much will those companies pay? So in order of magnitude, $550,000 is going into water reserves as of the end of last year. But probably in November, if we have good numbers, we will ask for $700,000 to continue to work on that project. So that's one rather large discussion to be had. West Street is another rather large discussion. We're going to have local participating costs, let's say of under $1 million, I don't really know, let's say it's $750,000 to $1 million. In the capital plan, it's been described previously as roughly $100,000, 240, and 240 over 3 years. I think it's going to be much better for logistical reasons for us to authorize debt in November town meeting for the entire amount. Then the state has proof that we have the local share, which they would prefer, instead of just having it in the capital plan. So that's another debt authorization problem in the state. I've been working on a reorganization of town government. There's lots of pluses and minuses in our budgets and in some of the accommodated cost budgets. So you'll see a rather long list of changes to the FY14 budget proposed. We'll have a long discussion on it.
Is there anything in the cemetery building?
Last night, the Board of Selectmen voted to continue the $50,000 allocated in the current fiscal year to continue to apply that towards a DPW site study, which we can do for a little less than $40,000. The cemetery funding was cut off at the end of the year by the school department, and we are very unlikely, almost no % chance of in November asking for that money back to continue the cemetery work until we know the results of the DPW study. So the selectmen were more interested, if you will, of hitting the reset button on that also, although it's a little less dramatic. Getting that information in first and then going to the next step. The cemetery trustees will probably make a motion that's going to differ in the town meeting at the hearing.
What does the school committee have to do?
They're in charge of facilities, and the money was in the facilities budget.
So why would,
I'm sorry that Mary left, but Marion and the town accountant and I had a discussion, and the way they operate in their department is if they don't have a signed contract, they don't carry money over like that. That's not a legal requirement, it's not a bad practice. Technically, it's not a legal requirement, it's not what we require, and so they canceled it. We didn't really know that until very end.
let's set kind of a bad tone for folks who want to move this project forward?
If it were a project that we're dying to do, it would have set a worse tone, I suppose. But where there's this question about the whole situation with the selectmen, it's okay. I mean, and we knew all along, if we still want to go forward, we just ask the next town meeting. Now it's going to be November to September, not a big deal. But the other spin-off issue of that, which is important, is we had budgeted cemetery debt service this year, which is not going to happen. And that's $397,500. So what I'm doing now, and the only folks I haven't heard from the schools are redoing the capital plan, which we always do this time of year for November town meeting. You are likely to see a big chunk of that spent on capital, a lot of it being West Street. So we have $400,000 to use. It's an opportunity to, I can think of 3 or 4 smallish capital requests. There's a DPW piece of equipment that's broken that has to be moved up from FY18. There's a couple police requests, which I'm very much in favor of. And there's another small issue. Plus the West Street will use up at least $300,000. And that's all part of the FY14 budget adjustments I mentioned. So that's kind of a broad overview. I don't think there's any prior year bills. There is a retirement board article that's likely to be on town meeting that has a very tiny financial impact for retirees. It's not much of all, but you'll need to weigh in.
Does the West Street project bring money in that was in out years, or is it additional?
Yeah, it would have been in 14, 15, 16. We may still pay it that way if we actually borrow as debt, so it might be arranged slightly. It's not really a big difference. Those are the things I know that are your wheelhouse for me. I'm probably forgetting 1 or 2 things. We have leftover money from some of the old debt projects we're going to repurpose, and we might steer some of it towards, or all of it towards West Street, for instance. And the last figure I got on that was less than 100,000.
When's the project supposed to start?
We won't know for a while. We may not know even in November town meeting, but it's very possible it'll start as soon as March, next March. It's up to the state to decide how to prioritize all the work they have, and we have no idea how we stand. But we need to be ready. We need to assume it could happen in March. If we don't know, definitely by November. And I expect to have the local cost estimated in time for the FinCom to vote and the selectmen to vote on the budget. We won't have it when the warrant closes at the end of September. We should have it by October.
What the cost of
The
the
cost
rent
of
is?
the local share. You know, I'll say 800,000 as a ballpark, maybe 900,000.
We're moving 400K. That's happening right there. Just
Good. Yeah.
Is there going to be any discussion of accelerating some of the sewer activities, given that we've got some time gap with snow introduced?
I forget the date, but in October, the selectmen are meeting to have an enterprise fund day.
Oh,
So they're going to discuss, what's going on with the water tower and all the enterprise funds. Stormwater is a big topic of discussion because we have those huge river projects, multi-million-dollar. They want to discuss whether to do those at all, whether to do them inside the tax levy, do them inside the enterprise fund, whatever. And as I've told you in the past, that's the night they want to have a discussion now on what the ramifications are of moving debt outside of the water fund or sewer fund into the tax rate. So they certainly, I don't know what to say, but I don't think they're going to vote anything that night. But if they do, I would say that's not likely to be on the November town meeting warrant, but it could be. That would be subject to town meeting approval and vote.
So is that both a discussion of, obviously, the implications for the townspeople of having a deductible versus not, but also running the project differently, of going at it perhaps in a more cost-effective way?
What do you mean the project?
In other words, if you're going to borrow to do the project, could you get gains by approaching it differently than if you spread it over long periods of time?
What project?
The water.
I don't think it has any impact on that, but that's an interesting question. Because when we borrow, we don't care who's paying, whether it's the water fund or the general fund. It's indifferent. Markets don't distinguish. I don't distinguish. It's just paperwork. I don't think it matters. The issues on the moving the debt, it's complex. It's how does it affect literally every person in town? And the answer is different. A generic person might use so much water, pay so many taxes, so you can figure out that. But there's so many people that are on either ends. We have a distribution of those who pay water bills versus tax bills, kind of a scatter plot. This issue came up and was passed in Winchester, I'm going to say somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago. And of course, the huge discussion was Winchester Hospital. They use a lot of water, they don't pay any taxes. So this is a complex issue to sort of address, if you will, fairness or equity.
The big users wanted it.
The big users of water would get a huge breakout of this, and they may not be the big
So by
tax.
putting it in the tax bill, we might save a couple of cents, but, you know, Raytheon might save.
Right. So one thing Winchester did is they went to a tiered water charge system, so that the higher users that got a break from this, the higher water use that happen to get a break from this, also pay higher rates. And they calculated at the time, and I'm doing it from memory, so I'm not positive, I think their taxpayers saved about $500,000 a year in income taxes.
$500,000 throughout the community. Which is.
$30 a person.
Yeah, I may have that number wrong, but that's what I remember.
How about, have you, I've been hearing good news about the 2 parcels land sales.
We sold both the parcels, both good prices, a little higher than we thought. Lockbrook and Pearl, and Audubon.
Maybe the single family house lots kind of thing?
Yeah. Look
Yep.
at market prices.
Sold to builders?
Are they both those prices firm and done? Or
Yeah.
both?
Yeah, we got the money's already in sale at real now.
So it's like 600,000 total?
Over that.
Sold to
I have
builders?
311 for the Pearl Street, that's retail, that's great. And I don't, the other ones are a little less, I don't know.
That's a law firm. Which one's first? Yeah, Lockbrook was a little bit lower, and Pearl Street was a little bit higher.
So what happens in that money?
It'll go into sale of real estate.
Okay, what can we use that?
Long-term obligations like pension or OPEB, debt or capital.
So it's good news. Well,
Yeah,
but-
yeah, that's a good point.
And I thought Pearl Street was, the thought was it was gonna get split and bought by 2 neighbors and not developed.
There was 2 slivers that were bought by neighbors. That's
Oh,
relatively
just
small money. And the lot was just, so the lot that's left is Oakland Road.
What's up with that?
Well, based on
Well,
tonight, I
see.
think we might want to be the big guy.
Okay, I'll cross that one off my question list. But back to the sewage just for a second. My question was not just structure, it was also magnitude. We anticipated that we were going to have 3 big things all hitting at the same time, the library, the sewage, the schools. If schools is pushed out a little bit in time, which it seems like it might be, is there an advantage to looking at accelerating some of the work or decelerating, whatever, just re-looking at the timing of it and the magnitude?
You know, it's a fair question, and my answer may not be entirely all there is to the story, but I just view water and sewer as different. So all the work that we need to do in water or sewer are programmed in those enterprise fund budgets and capital. Do you want to start charging people more for water and sewer because there's not going to be a debt exclusion for the next 3 years? That's what it would come down to.
Well, but it's timing. It's not actually charging more. It's when they pay.
Well, it is. You have to pay for it.
Right, but you're going to pay for it no matter what. The question is, do you pay a little bit more
But
now,
if we do the work sooner, you're paying for it sooner.
but we don't have the school project getting in the same time frame?
Right. So again, the question is, are you willing to pay more in water and sewer during a period when you would have had a higher tax bill, and then reverse it?
I agree. That's exactly the question.
Yeah, I don't, you know, I would say that there's a couple of projects out there. There's DPW/cemetery. There's potentially putting water outside the, tax levy. But is there any other outside the tax levy things? Well, the library.
Right.
I think that's all.
Speaking of which, Karen, you've been going to YouTube. Can you give us an update on what's going on?
Yeah, I got a quick one because I wasn't prepared to share with you guys tonight. But I got an update from Ruth on vacation, kindly wrote a big awkward iPad email. So they picked the designer, and I don't know if they finished their negotiations. Okay, so we don't know exactly, can't be public about it yet. But then the next step is finding a lease space, and I understand from her that it's in the Central Register, it's being advertised for 30 days, so it's looking like September 9th.
Right.
For people to respond and us to identify. So we might have an update for our 11th meeting,
Yes.
September 11th.
Yeah, the bids are due September 9th at 2 o'clock to me, so.
And we'll know who the designer is.
And I've sent 3 possibilities forward to the village project manager. And they know at least 2. Doesn't mean they'll all bid. And remember, they agreed, the library trustees agreed they could continue to extend this, which is really,
And it's not gonna be the post office, right?
I don't foresee that would happen in the time frame they need.
So does the Woburn Street School now become a possibility?
Well, you know, until tonight.
No, David, it's gonna be affordable housing.
I think we have the parking lot issue locking down.
We, a year ago, we talked about that as a bridge to the school. So use it for a library for 2 years while they needed it, and then you turn it into a school and package it all together. That didn't work out from a time frame, because the library needed it pretty soon, and the schools wanted to go in sooner than the library would have allowed them to. Now that it's a different scenario, I absolutely would forward the information on that property to the owner's project manager with
And
background. Well, that, yeah. Now, whether St. Agnes has any interest at all in participating, I have no idea.
Right, right.
But yeah, I'll forward the information.
I think their bills paid on that. I know, actually, so the library doesn't need it till next May, is that?
March, I'd say.
Okay,
March.
so they don't need it till next year, and I don't know where St. Agnes' project is, but maybe it
Now
dovetails.
look at the new buyers.
Yeah, I obviously have had a chance to have that discussion, and probably wouldn't have it firsthand. It's entirely appropriate. Unless they want to. But I'll forward all the information to our project manager.
Speaking of churches and schools, I don't know if this was talked about the last meeting, I didn't see it in the notes, so I wasn't there. We wanted to investigate what's happening in terms of payments of no taxes and no payments. That would be a good investigation for us just to understand why and how that works. Is there a way to get that?
Yeah, I've
started?
asked the assessors, I didn't give them a time frame this soon, I think I asked them about October. I can't remember, well, I'll find out.
And also, at some point, I think, didn't we want to bring in the new chair of the RMLD?
Oh, yeah.
Was that something that we were gonna do? I don't know, I think
She'd
it's
be happy to come,
maybe a good time for, maybe for September?
the new general manager.
Yeah.
Yeah, she'll give a state of RMLD in November's town meeting.
Yeah, so maybe that's good for us.
So if you want to see her before that.
And if anybody, and if we are gonna do that, and if we can get that on the agenda, if anybody can maybe get me some, I know we might have thought a lot about it, and there's just sort of general questions that maybe we can prepare her in advance for,
Okay.
perhaps, to be a little fair. And, you know, she's new on the job, so I don't know. What?
Make them easy.
Does, Marlene Topper? You wanna?
She's already visited town hall a few times. She's very, very pleasant and very good.
And at the September 11th meeting, are you prepared to review what things you have in mind for restructuring?
Probably not. I should do that with the selectmen first, and I forget what date I've scheduled that. I think it's after they close their warrants, first meeting on October. I can give you an order of ballpark figure of that. Now, no suspense. I will make the comment, and hopefully I can stick to this in another month or two. I don't think we'll need to use any free cash. I don't think it'd be a big change in the use of free cash. If you remember, we're using $1,050,000. My objective is to cut that to $1 million just for purely cosmetic reasons. I think I'll be able to do that. The only reason I wouldn't be able to do that is if West Street turns out to be much bigger.
So we're talking about for 50,
For this current year.
for this current row.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to give you a quick number, and this is totally off the top of my head, but based on reasonable assumptions in revenues and expenses, such as 7% health insurance, and using $1 million in free cash, we're around the 2.5% operating budget. And I have to tell you, in the last few years, that number's been way lower this time of year. Again, it may change. It may not change for the better, which it has in the last couple of years. But that's not so bad. You know, it's not going to get everything done that John and I want to do, but you know, as opposed to negative this time of year, which it was 2 or 3 years ago, it's nuts.
You know,
And I think our cash reserves position is gonna be nice, because I know on the town side, we turned back a ton of money. You know, it's great.
You know, I kind of wish that we had gone through some of the questions. And then one of the questions that, I don't know, somebody here might have put it on, I don't remember, discussed, is that there seems to be this big fund, sort of, that they're keeping, that sort of the excess for tuition for all. And I'd like to sort of understand how that works, you know, does it mean that they, over, I mean, we're the highest tuition, or one of the highest tuitions. Did we charge too much? Was it, you know, costs that weren't really, that they didn't really have? So if it looks like there's gonna be another year of kind of doing what we do now, you know, do we look at sort of using that, you know, have another look at that piece? It seemed like there was more money in there. You know, they were using to offset, you know, the year that we didn't get paid, you know, state aid. You know, so how did it get to that size?
I can't.
That was, yeah, and that was.
But I think it's good. During the budget, I mean, their line item is the bottom line item we talk about, but we talk about what's in between to figure out if we disagree with the bottom line. And that seems like a perfect discussion at the time to talk about the mechanics of what that is and what it can be used for and how freely it's just part of their cash and budget versus being restricted. I'd be interested in that as well.
I do sort of understand how we can start adding up, because again, they're writing off a bunch of overhead kind of money. And they're not literally gonna pay overhead kind of money from that fund. So it
I know
tends
that's
to,
part of it.
it tends to add up each year.
I don't think it's that big a fund.
Well, was it gonna be, it was gonna be enough to
450.
fund, it was gonna
Just
be enough to
450.
fund a big chunk of the difference.
I think last summer it was, and I have no idea what it is now, but last summer, I thought they were saying it was over 500,000,
Yeah.
700,000, with a projection that it would be lower by the time they needed the bridge.
Well, let's figure that out. So that's enough that it's worth just understanding the mechanics and use.
Yeah, so maybe we'll just wait till then.
One thing that I'll bring up to them, but what I would encourage to happen for us to think about too, is are there private alternatives to public kindergarten? And if those could be in the same kind of price ballpark, or a little bit less, is that a possible solution to the need for public kindergarten, since it's not going to be publicly funded for some period of time anyway?
And but the flip side to that also is that by going to the ultimate converter, are you putting some, you know, long-term providers out of business? Because now, so it has an impact on business folks and.
Whether it's there or not, though, I think from a cost perspective, based on that 4,200 that they threw up there, yeah, it can't be close. Okay, for preschool right now, it's 1,400. Oh, sign me up for 4,200 now. It's not even close. Yeah. So.
Anything else, anybody want to add on or?
Restaurant tax, how is it doing? And my guess would be that it should be accelerated.
You should be funding the town with that
Yeah,
thing.
from
now.
Portland Pie Company, right?
I'm doing my part.
And more to come.
No, so.
Has anyone tried that one?
I literally,
Yeah.
I've gone there 5 times, I had 5 different things.
That was just last year.
Yeah, I was thinking you were putting on.
We're running about 400,000 right now. When we passed the tax, the discussion at town meeting was in the, I don't know, 165 to 225 ballpark. We sort of knew that was low based on how they did it. And plus, obviously, we've had a lot of growth in restaurants.
More to come.
We're right around 400. I'm not sure it's going to grow a huge amount from 400. I think 500 is the top. Unless
Well,
we're restaurants.
you got 2 other places opening up soon.
Yep.
I think FinCom.
There's only so much food we can eat.
But we get other people to eat it too.
Well, if we keep getting other people to eat it, of course.
Remember, that 7% goes on the beer and wine also.
That's right.
Okay. There's July 24th minutes if you're of mind to look at.
Most of this was the only question there.
There's something a little weird on the bottom of page 2, the last full paragraph. Mr. Reardon asked that FinCom deem by listing questions. It's a mistake, I just don't know
It's
how to
probably-
fix it.
Probably begin.
Again, okay, that makes sense. Begin, okay, that makes sense. What's wrong, but I didn't know it was supposed to.
I'm not dyslexic with numbers.
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to accept the minutes of July 24th.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? 6-8, nothing?
I was not there.
Anything else? Anyone want to talk about?
I'll just comment that both town and school staff did an enormous amount of work on this project.
Yeah, I know, they
More than you could
They
ever.
look forlorn.
And I have to say, everyone was very open and honest behind closed doors. And the superintendent was very receptive. He encouraged honesty. He didn't want to say we're doing this no matter what. So I think, the community should be very pleased that the schools are so open-minded and receptive. They really are.
I know, and I want to reiterate what you had just said, but it's the truth. That's really hard to
Yeah.
invest so much time,
It
effort.
is, absolutely.
And that's so difficult.
You know, and the outcome of this is a huge amount of information that everyone has learned. So now the options that were not this option all look different, for better or worse. And for St. Agnes, they have a parcel that's now zoned to be sold if they want to. So they are actually much better off. So I don't feel bad about anything that's happened for them because they are now in a good place. We did a lot of work to see that.
Well, and then the other thing too is that they did have a number of community meetings.
Yep.
People emerged that, who might not have emerged before, and hopefully they tap into that and utilize that, those energies on their working group, and, I encourage them to make it broad. And maybe it takes a year or two, but they'll be back, and I'll say for the record that whatever they come back with will cost more than what this did. I don't want to bet me on it.
And I want to also commend the schools for going ahead with the exercise of operating costs. I think that was helpful, even though it's not relevant. I think it's nice for us to actually see those numbers, because now we have a frame of reference going forward.
Although we never really got a ballpark number for that building. But
Well, we
It
didn't.
wouldn't be much
Yeah.
to run a building like that.
No, I meant from, well,
Not
check my utilities. Well, I mean, nurse, custodian.
Well, that's all in.
add Oh, okay.
Well, that'll all be part of whatever working group they, whatever option they put, they'll have.
It really is commendable though. That was as he spoke, I was overwhelmed with, wow, that had to have been really hard to do, but so the right thing to do. It's very impressive.
Yeah, and it was very much a surprise last week.
Okay, you want to make a motion?
Second?
Second? All those in favor? All right, thanks, everybody. See you all September 11th. If anybody has any other thoughts or ideas on what to add for September 11th, just